type into there and comment on anything you want, and there'll be a few interactions, little exercises during the webinar that you can speak to. And if you've got any questions or comments, just type it into there too. We're supported ably by Sarah Etch in Kelowna, who's way more brilliant at this sort of stuff than anybody I've ever known. So if you have a sound issue or a comment, just type into there and Sarah will address it. I'm going to try not to interrupt the flow in the morning of the conversation if I can go. So any questions about I'll respond to about what the subject, and any technical issues Sarah will support. There is a couple of times when we'll have some interaction, like a little voting, a little scoring, and a little feedback from you that I'll be happy to be engaged when we have that conversation. And of course, at the end of this, later today, I'll send you a recording of the full webinar. And what I really want you to do as we walk through this is to focus on what you need for your job and what your organization might want out of this. So the conversation is really about don't F it up, this conversation that you have with people when things are tough. Here in Calgary and Alberta, things are pretty tough. There's been over 100,000 job losses. And there's been people losing work and out of work, and tough financial times for lots of employers and lots of employees. And so it's really timely for us in this environment, and I know throughout the States too, there's quite a bit of job loss related to the petroleum industry. And these are conversations that impact people's lives every day, and I think it behooves us as bosses and leaders to be able to have these conversations respectfully. It could be laying somebody off, it could be dismissing somebody, it could be a conversation around something as most challenging conversations I've ever had in all my life, believe it or not, were around coffee makers, replacing coffee makers in our office. Like that caused so much consternation and trouble and problems. But during the next 45 minutes, we'll focus on how to not keep your employees in the dark, because lack of information is deadly for you as a leader. How to encourage two-way communications, how to convey confidence in your voice and role as the leader, and how to be a good role model and fiscal role model when times are tough for yourself. There will be an ask at the end of this. Like, I'm going to ask that if you want to have a further conversation, that when you get the recording of this, there'll be a link there that you can schedule a 15-minute conversation about anything on your mind. I'm happy to have that conversation. Some of you know me. I've been around a while. I'm devastatingly handsome, as you can see in that picture. I'm a speaker, a coach, I'm an educator at Mount Royal University, and I'm a consultant in leadership. And I've spent over 35 years in uniform as a soldier in the Canadian Army, and also working for the Canadian Red Cross, dealing with people under every circumstance imaginable, led big teams, led $40 million businesses, and led small, intimate teams with minimal budget but big expectations. So I know lots about people. I've worked on extraordinarily complex situations, from combat to huge disasters, and all of those things relied heavily on me being able to communicate effectively to my people and to my bosses also to get our work done. I live in Calgary, and I have an extraordinarily lovely and patient wife, Deborah, and I also live here with Phoebe the Wonder Dog, who is my co-pilot in life. Have you ever had a conversation where you regret? So I have a friend, a great friend of mine, and you may have saw it a little clip in the video, but he runs a small manufacturing company in Ontario, and he's kind of a funny guy in that he's a bit of a scatter when it comes to lots of things, and he's always running behind the schedule, and he's always late delivering, but he does good work for his people. He works with laundry handling equipment mostly, like the stuff that you'd see in a hospital where the sheets are stacked up and the dirty laundry goes in. And he got this huge order, probably one of the biggest orders he ever received, and he spent hired a couple extra guys, and he brought in his family and friends to work on this, and he delivered this big project on time for probably the first time in a long time for him. And he loaded it onto a truck and sent it down the road, a rented truck, and sent it down the road. Well, it was Ontario. It was probably around this time of year. It was a freak snowstorm. The roads were icy, and he had young guys driving the truck, a truck they weren't familiar with, on roads they weren't familiar with that were a little slick. And, of course, this truck skidded off the road and landed in the ditch. When he finally got the call that this truck had gone off the road, his first comments to the people on the phone, what he asked was, "How was the load? How was the cargo?" Now, this guy is not a bad human being. He's actually a good guy, and his wife and his kids love him, and his dog loves him, but he really regretted that conversation from the beginning because he dismissed the human aspects. He didn't even ask how the guys were that were in the truck. His focus was purely on the load. And often when we have these conversations, we make these terrible mistakes where we talk too much. And I'm sure you've all been in a meeting with a boss or somebody around you that domineers a conversation and takes up way too much air than maybe even the value that they bring to the conversation. We often have conversations where we don't ask questions. I'm sure I know lots of times when I've walked away from something and I thought, what the heck was that all about? What were they asking, or what did they mean by that? And as in my friend who lost the truck, the load on the truck, and the guys went in the ditch, he didn't show any empathy. Like, we're all human beings, and we all have to express ourselves as human beings. And then when we don't show empathy, we become something less than human to those that we're talking to. We talk over people, sorry for the typo, we've talked over top of people's conversations. So if someone's trying to talk to us, one of the killers in a conversation is to, as somebody, before they even hit a comma or period in their statement, you're already talking on top of them. And often we react too quickly when we're having a conversation. So one of the guiding rules that's taken me a long time to learn is that if somebody says something or asks a question, don't react. Take a few seconds and pause and let the silence set. And a couple things happen when you do that is that it allows the person talking to you to believe that you are considering what they're saying with merit. It also buys you a bit of time to be able to answer a better question. And we've all spoken before we thought. It just blurts out of our mouth. These are all regrets that we have when we have conversations, and it's just not at work, it's at home and it's probably a truism in life that often our conversational skills are worse at home with the ones we love than the ones we work with at work. So what I'd like you to do is, on the next slide here, is what regrets do you have? Have you ever lacked the courage to be true? Did you ever fire off that flaming email? I know I have. Have you ever lied, a white lie to cover something up or deceive? So go down to the chat box and just type in what regret you might have had over something. You know, have you not stayed in touch with friends? Is there times when you left a meeting or a conversation where you didn't get your feelings out on the table the way you wanted? And sometimes, for good or bad, we've deceived people around us in our conversations. So just take a second, go down to the chat box and pick 1 through 6, or all of 1 through 6. Which one of them have you got a regret in conversation that you may have had in the last little while? Oh, a big 5 there, yeah. A courage to be true, that's always good. Yeah, all of them, but most number 5. Wow, that's harsh. Carrie, and number 5, yeah, you know, it's a huge frustration when you walk out of that and haven't done that. Yeah, and we've all, when we deceive, it's like that terrible old joke about, you know, when your wife comes up to you and asks you does this dress make me look overweight? Well, you're in big trouble. But white lies can actually take away from it. Good morning, Carol. And number 5. Yeah, when you walk away from a conversation and you really didn't get it off your chest, and eats away at you. And as a boss, we have to be able to facilitate people, letting them get it off of their chest. One of the big things in life that we have to understand is that when you're the boss, and your people will never understand the weight on your shoulders. They will never get that your job is not to be their friend. They will never understand the heat that you are under by your peers, by other members of your team, and the pressure that your boss is putting on you to do your job. It's really a challenge, and nor should they know, for that matter. That's the number one guide rule to this conversation, is your people should never know that. And people are fundamentally, in the nicest possible way to put this, self-centered. They're worried about their work, their life, their place. And when they're not aware of what's going around them, often they will never understand the pressure you're under. And that shows up in conversations in a number of ways. Often we have to, you've always heard people talk about being positive and have positive thinking and positive conversations, but when you have to lay people off or fire somebody, that even if they deserve it, you still have to do that. Some of the worst jobs I've ever had to do in my life was firing somebody, even though they deserved it. Kept me up all night. It was a huge pressure, and you still have to go and do it. And if you're going to have to, these challenging economic times or reorganizational times in other organizations, you still have to go and get this work done, even though it's tearing you up, and you still have to present yourself as professional. And it's all well and good when somebody says, be positive, but you really have some dirty work on your hands to do, and you need to get on with it. And that's your job as a boss. A big thing is not to keep employees in the dark. When I was in the service, the soldiers always knew what was going on by watching the officers and the non-commissioned officers, how they behaved around them. If there was lots of scurrying around and meetings and stuff like that, the soldiers always knew what was happening. So if you're in an environment where there's a big organizational change, potentially layoffs, all of the managers are huddled in boardrooms, and people's leaders whose doors at one time are normally wide open are now all closed, that telegraphs through your whole organization. Doesn't mean that you don't do that and not close, but you need to be able to communicate to your people what's going on. And in the absence of information, people are really, really good about making it up. And it might be made up based on fact, or it might be made up based on rumor and conjecture. But you need to get ahead of that. And you need to understand what they know and are thinking. So one of the things that I recommended, we just did a project for an engineering firm here in town over the last year, and it was, although there was no layoffs involved with this particular project, there had been because they were working the oil patch and probably cut their staff by 20% by this time. And then there was an organizational leadership restructuring to allow them to do their job, which I was helping them with. And one of the things that they weren't doing was telling their staff. So what I encouraged them to do was bring in all of their team into the boardroom for lunch and learn, sit them down, and lay out the situation of what's been going on, and to be balanced. And so we invested some time and energy with a communications professional that works with me, and we designed charts that showed that they were actually making money every month. Yes, they had to do some layoffs, but they had lots of work in the pipeline, and they were profitable every month through all of last year. It took the pressure right off of the employees. And also the employees were assured that there would not be another layoff round until after Christmas. So instead of people just disappearing in the middle of the day, they knew that they were safe in their roles until this period of time. And they could plan out their fall and through to Christmas with some level of comfort in what was going on. And the owners of the company were very forthright about what was happening, what was going on, and it just took the pressure off the whole organization. Now, you don't want to overwhelm people with financial numbers that you'd share with investors or bankers, but it was helpful for the staff to see that there was lots of work in the pipeline. It was super helpful for them to see that they were profitable. Yep. Yes, if there was an expense and that people had been laid off, but people understand. They're not stupid. They get that this is tough times in that particular sector. So it really helped them to be able to do that and have that conversation. One of the things that is really hard for a boss to do is to allow for two-way communications. It's almost impossible because, you know what, we think we're the boss and we think that we know everything and we know that we're going to manage this whole thing around communications. But two-way communications builds empathy and humanity with you as the human being, as the boss. It doesn't mean that you're their best friend and that you're going to be able to make everything okay at the end of the day, but allowing that two-way conversation is super important. First off, never make a promise you can't keep. That's like super off base. Like if you tell people there will be no layoffs, they know that that's a lie, especially if you're in engineering or an oil patch company these days. If the boss comes waltz through the lunchroom and says there'll be no layoffs, almost everybody there either they're in denial or they know it's a lie, one or the other. And the other thing is to allow employees to talk and ask questions. This does a number of things. One is it opens up this line of communications, and you get to hear what they're thinking. One of the strategies around this is not to make it super formal, because if you're in a big theater style or a big room full of people, that might be required to be able to make an overall broad statement communications piece. But then go to their offices and their desks and their workstations and start having a conversation and allow them to talk and ask because then you'll start gathering information and allow them to ask questions. Because in the nuggets of their questions are rumors and innuendos and concerns that they might have about what's happening. So to be very comfortable and relaxed, and spend a lot of time with the people the furthest down the food chain in your organization. Nobody in your organization knows what's going on better than caretakers and receptionists. They see everything and they know everything. So get on their good side. Listen to these people as they ask their questions, because underlying that question is always a root of concern for them. And you should actually conduct yourself a little bit like a border control officer or immigration officer at the border points. If you ever really pay attention to what happens to you when you walk in, they will ask you a question and you will answer it, and then they will go silent. And then what happens is you will start talking, because nature abhors a vacuum. And you'll start prattling on and start talking about the extra bottle of whiskey you got in your purse, or the smokes, or whatever it is you're bringing across. So if you have these conversations with your employees, use silence as a really effective tool to be able to get the people to start talking to you. And if you're interested in silence a bit more, like on my website, if you go to stephenarmstrong.ca, you can sign up for our blogs, and there's a search bar there. Just type in silence. And I did quite an extensive blog post on how to use silence. The other thing is to dispel rumors and reassure people. So the thing with rumors is they're going to start and they're going to happen. So, all you can do is fight rumors with facts. And if somebody asks you a question that you just cannot answer because it's secret or confidential at the time, just say, I can't answer that question at this time. I will be able to answer it in a week's time. But if you try to paper it over with a bit of a fib or a bit of a deception, then all that's going to do is fester that rumor into something that's going to get out of control. And people need to be reassured, especially in tough economic times. It's not that they don't know that these are bad times. People are not stupid, but they need to have some comfort and reassurance around it. For example, like I said earlier, where the company reassured their employees that there was work in the pipeline, they were profitable, and there'd be no consideration of layoffs until after a certain period of time. And that provided quite a bit of comfort and reassurance to their employees that allowed them to get back to their job and not be stewing and fretting about rumors or innuendos or concerns that were out there. So you need to convey confidence. So here's the thing, saber-toothed tigers. We are not that far from our Cro-Magnon prehistoric brain. In fact, the amygdala and the lower cortex of the top of the spinal cord really controls everything about what we do. And that's where the fight, flight, or freeze component of our brain is. And that is quite actually super helpful when you're wandering around in the bush in the prehistoric times and there's saber-toothed tigers that are laying await in the long grass waiting for you. So that's the thing, when you hear the grass whisper or a twig break in the middle of the night or the creak of the house in the middle of the night, that stops you dead in your tracks. And it releases adrenaline and cortisol into your system. So the adrenaline is actually the trigger, the gas, the nitroglycerin gas that's going to rocket you out of the way. And the cortisol is the part that goes through your whole body and starts shutting down unnecessary things. So what happens when the amygdala starts taking over and you're in this fight, flight, or freeze mode, whether you're going to duke it out with the bad guys or you're going to freeze and go to ground or you're going to run away, it's these hormones and chemicals that are neurochemicals that are firing through your body that actually start shutting down things like your frontal lobes of your brain, the part that controls rational thinking, thoughtfulness, memories, all of those things that make you a human being in the modern world that allows you to be able to think through problematic situations. These, when the saber-toothed tiger's in the room, this shuts down. And the reason that happens is quite simple, is that your body is designed for you not to start to rationalize that the saber-toothed tiger is just a big pussycat, and if I talk to it like a logical, reasonable, thinking human being, it's not going to eat me. The problem with this is when you bring it to modern times and you're in your work environment and things are going bad and people's amygdala start to take over. People are threatened. Their payroll is threatened. Their family could be threatened. Their housing is threatened because it's all connected to their paycheck. Their careers could be threatened. Or a boss could just be misspeak or speak poorly. And in that case, then the person might physically be threatened by the way of the tone or the conduct of the person. So then this is when the frontal lobe and the rational parts of your brain start shutting off. And it's just something to be aware because people will respond out of character when they're threatened. And that, again, goes back to our prehistoric cousins and family tree to protect us from these dangers. So if you come in as a boss with a message that is threatening, not with humanity and empathy, but it comes across as a threat, your people will do one of three things. Fight, which is the last thing you need to have happening, is big arguments and fights and every man for himself sort of attitude in your workplace. Flight, which means they'll leave, or freeze, which is potentially even worse because maybe you can deal, if somebody leaves, they leave, that's unfortunate. If somebody is taking on an aggressive stance, you can manage that generally. But if they just go to ground and freeze, then that's like a sickness that's starting to move through the organization as far as communications goes. And You will not be able to change and move your organization through a challenging time if people go to ground. We used to always say in the military that as long as the soldiers were grumbling and griping and complaining, things were cool. Everything was good. When they went quiet, you had a big problem because then they were upset. And that lived out true a few years ago in one of my last roles with Red Cross. And one of the things that happened over a period of number of years, people got used to a modest cost of living increase of about 2%. So people kind of got comfortable with that. They expected it sort of every July 1st. And there was no talk of that being different until about the middle of June of one year when they announced it was going to be 1%. Now, really, in the big scheme of things, it wasn't a lot of, it was the principle of the thing, not the amount of money wasn't that great for most people, but it was the principle of things. And I remember that when it came down the pipeline, nobody knew this was happening except some very high-level staff, executives. I didn't even know. And when it was announced, there wasn't a single complaint. There wasn't a single gripe. There was nothing. And that just told me that that was a hurtful experience for our team and our employees. If people had been told in advance that the annual increase was under consideration and there would be an announcement on a certain date that it might be not what you're used to expect, you know what? People would have been irritated and upset, but really they'd have got over it. But it came as a surprise. It attacked people at their very base level, which is their dinner plate and their survival and their families, and people went stone quiet. The amygdala took over and they froze, which was an extraordinarily dangerous situation for the organization to be in. The other thing we have to do as bosses when times are tough is to be the role model. And this is where it's tough because you know what? I've been the boss when I've had to do some things that weren't very pleasant, and I wasn't maybe even being treated as well as I thought I should be, yet I still had to represent a professional image towards my team. And double standards overall destroy credibility. So, for example, given the pay increase conversation that we just had about people and their annual increase, cost of living increase, if all of the senior staff would have got a 2% increase that year, and the workers and the junior staff would have only got a 1%, that would have arguably crippled trust within the organization. And we all have to have skin in the game. So if I go back to the engineering firm that I was doing this project for, this leadership review, one of the things that had happened was they started cutting. It was sort of a bit of it's probably not fair. It was a little bit of a frat house. They had a good time. Like they liked to have a lot of fun, and there was, beer party, keg parties, and there was lots of pizza brought in usually. And as things started getting tight financially for the company, they started cutting out the nice to haves. But the management meetings continued to go on with like a pretty fancy schmancy catered lunch. Now in the big scheme of things, really, it was probably pretty effective use of time for their 7 or 8 senior managers to meet in the boardroom over the lunch hour and have a sandwich while they were doing it. But when they were cutting back on the nice to haves for the employees, but not seemingly paying the price as senior management, they didn't have any skin in the game. They lost their credibility. I personally have a problem with, some of these organizations that are laying off thousands and thousands of employees in the oil patch, and the senior executives are taking in bonuses for when their staff are being hit up on, are being hurt by their decisions. I get it, but they're being bonused because they're, maintaining the bottom line and they're doing, managing fiscally the organization. I get the dichotomy there, but I just think it just looks bad. You know what? I recall when we were struggling with even something as simple as parking spaces in a downtown office here in Calgary. I purposely gave up my parking spot to one of the ladies on our team so she didn't have to walk through an alley to get to a parking spot. I parked in another spot, off-site spot, a surface spot about a block away from where our office was. But all of a sudden, when I say that, I don't want to come off sounding like I sacrificed myself for the organization. I didn't have a problem with it. But I put skin in the game. I was the one who had walked the distance, and she had the value of having a parking space close up that was provided her security and safety. So if you don't have skin in the game, you have a big problem. So as we come to the close, maybe take a second here as we go in. Like, what's the one thing you're really worried about? Just go to the chat box and type it in. Like, what's the one thing that you're really super worried about in your conversations with your employees? Even if it's if you're in the oil patch, it could be a financial issue. If you're at work someplace, is there a question that you might have? So there's a great question. Like, how do you manage changes within the organization? Well, again, I recall changing the coffee makers, and I often use it as a joke. It's probably more dangerous for me to change the coffee makers in our organization that time than what it was when I was in a combat situation, because it was mean and it was nasty. But really what we ended up doing was walking people through, as I said earlier, we got them all in the room, and we had this conversation about the problem with the old machines, which were beat up and costing lots of money. And we spent time walking through the cost of working through these new machines, and then we put it together and laid it out. And for sure, some people were not happy because they were actually curing. So there were some people that were worried about the recycling. But we walked it through. So, Carol, there's a couple comments here about bullying and mobbing going on in the workplace. Well, that's pretty interesting in that what you're having there is obviously an unhealthy workplace. So what I would suggest if you're going to have that conversation is, first off, is to gather everybody and start developing a communications plan that involves an education component around awareness of bullying. One of the issues, I'm not sure, Carrie, where your location is, and I know it's not a situation here in Alberta yet, but in some provinces and in most states in the United States, it's actually a workplace hazard actionable under the legislation around occupational health and safety. So you better get on. First off, if you're in those sort of situations, you have a risk to your organization legislatively that you need to get onto. What I would suggest is develop an education program, and then I would have a high level of monitoring of that, in that if you see who is behind the bullying or mobbing, or who are the leaders in that the organization focuses its energy on that person as a performance issue. When I say that, either you might have to remove them by termination or relocate them. You may invest in personal training and development for that person. And then you need to walk the talk. So if people think they can get away, it's like schoolyards, right? It's kids on the schoolyard. If they think they can get away with it, bullying, and the teacher isn't watching, or the teacher isn't going to do something about it, then they're going to get away with it. They're going to try. So your leaders really need to be on top of that and treat it first off as a performance issue. Support it with education and ongoing monitoring. Another question in here was, change management. So one of the things with change management in communications is, as Brenda's mentioned in her chat box, is that there is a loss. Like you're leaving what was comfortable, or maybe not, but at least it was what you knew and you were good with it the way it was, and now you're moving to this new place. And it takes a lot of work to allow people to grieve what they're leaving behind. But as a leader, you really need to be able to be personal and, again, empathetic and with great humanity, painting this picture about what the new thing is going to do and how you're going to get there and what it's going to look like when you get there. Again, if I go back to some of the conversations we had earlier, it's like it can't be all sunshine and roses. People aren't that stupid. But you need to be able to paint the compelling picture for why they want to jump into the new change or the new reality. And by working hard on that, and it can't be by email. Bosses in this day and age, organizations in this day and age are awful at sending out emails explaining to people. Yes, there's a place for written communication. But these big organizational changes and things that really, if they go sideways on you, are going to really F up your organization and your communication, is that you need to be able to walk and talk with these guys, your employees, and bring them along. Well, there is truth, Carrie. Yeah, I see Carrie brought on a point that if there's no accountability or oversight, then you have another organizational issue. Depends on your relationship with your bosses and then your employers. Is that, if it's safe, and I say that I mean in every sense of the word, it may be something to bring up to them in a respectful way, maybe at a retreat or in a place where everything is on the table. But if an organization's employers and supervisors aren't willing to step up and deal with these sort of issues, they're not going to be all that open to have that conversation. I'd be happy to, if you want, to have the offer is that your people are welcome to join me, and I'm happy to walk through it a little bit. What else we got here? So Sherry brings, change is easier to swallow if you indicate that it will be. Sorry, I'm just lost track on what you're writing there. Yeah, so if things, focus on what will be the same in the organization and focus on what's changing. Not often when we do these organizational changes, it's not a wholesale change. It's not everything is changing all at once. So focus on the parts that change and really focus on the benefit. And like I say, there's nothing worse than somebody painting a sunshine, roses, cat sleeping with dogs picture about this new utopia that you're going to move to. People understand that it's going to be a bit of a challenge and a bit tough as you move through it. So we're just about closing up to 11:15, which I commit that you'll be off the line if you want to be off the line. But this is what I'm going to offer to everybody on the line, is that if you want to explore one of these things a little bit more, I'm happy to invest the time you want with it, certainly at a minimum of 15 minutes in a conversation. And when I send out the recording here later today, there'll be a link to a scheduling device, a scheduling software package app that you can just click on there and schedule a 15-minute phone or Skype conversation with me, and we can walk through that. I can see that there's some people that are have some stuff on their chest that they'd like to get off, and I'd be happy to have that conversation. The thing around our role as being a boss is this. People want to be led. If you've ever been in a situation when there was a leadership vacuum, you are adrift. It's sort of like that Sandra Bullock movie when in Space Gravity, when she was just kind of floating around out there. People need to be tethered to something. They need to be tethered to the mothership. Even in that movie, if you saw it, she was tethered to the spirit of the George Clooney character as she went through. People need that level of support. I would encourage everyone on the line to really invest in being a leader. And it's at the same time infinitely simple and straightforward as it is complex and challenging. But here's the thing. None of our people expect us to be perfect. Well, they might want us to be perfect, but they don't expect us to be perfect because they know they watch us every day. They watch us as bosses, as being a boss or a leader. They watch us every day, and they know that we're going to screw it up. Sometimes they even have side bets, but that's another conversation. But what I would suggest is that when you are talking to your people about tough times and hard decisions, is that you act with the knowledge and skill that you have as a leader. Invest in rehearsing before you go to talk to your people. Write out a script, help you walk through that. You need to be courageous. You need to make those hard decisions and pass on those tough messages, but you need to do it in a way that's humble and selfless. And when you do your job and you do communicate, do so with great purpose and motivation, and people will get behind you. If you waffle and if you hedge your bets and you're not clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, your people will not follow you. They might stay there and work for you, but they're not going to follow you very far. And you're going to fail in this important message that you've got going. So as we close again, I just offer everybody to spend a few minutes, and if you like, we can even unmute the call here. There's some good conversation going on. And we can have a conversation, and for sure, later today, you will get a copy of this whole recording, the slides and the audio, and you will be able to, if you want, be able to book that 15-minute conversation with me. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to cut Sarah free. I think we and what I'm going to do too is I'm going to unmute.
You are now unmuted.
And I think everybody could say hi to Sarah. And thank her for her time.
Thanks, Sarah.
And if somebody wants to enter in a bit of a conversation while we have a few minutes here, if you've got other things to do, I'd encourage you to head off to work. But if you want to stay on for a minute, that's cool too. You're welcome, Colleen. Take care. Barry, thanks for joining us. It was a great pleasure, as always. Carrie, have a great day. Take care, Brenda. Jaya. Martin, thank you. Carol, yeah, take care. Take care. You're welcome, Sherry. Let's set up a call sometime soon. Hear what you got, what you're up to. Yeah, absolutely. On hearing nothing, I'm going to sign off, and everybody enjoy the day, and I look forward to talking to you all soon. Take care.